Alright, so today I'm going to show you guys how to run a mesh, create a mesh for your geometry part that we've made. Now that we've set everything up the way that we want it to, we are ready to start doing a mesh. Now it's important that we have a specific part of the region set up before we run a mesh. It's a little bit counterintuitive. But for example, if we wanted to include any symmetry in our model, let's say that this was the same reflected across this face down here. If we wanted to include that symmetry, then we would come down to water bottom, select the node that says water bottom, and come down here to the type. And we could change this to a symmetry plane. It's important that you do that before you mesh because symmetry planes have different mesh characteristics than just normal walls do. But in this case, we don't need to do that. So we're going to come up here. The place that you're going to work with a mesh is going to be under the operations node. We're going to right click, select new mesh, automated mesh. This is going to be the most common mesh that we're going to work with. And the four common meshes that I like to use are the surface remesher, the polyhedral mesher, the thin mesher, and the prism layer mesher. I'll explain some of these. Others are a little bit more complicated to explain, so we'll visit that another time. But we're going to select OK, and then we're going to open this node that just happened. And you see there's a little exclamation mark because it's not, we haven't completed all of the necessities yet. We haven't executed the mesh yet. So let me look at our meshers here. So we have our four that I said. Basically the most important two that I'm going to talk about are the thin mesher and the prism layer mesher. The prism layer is something where it creates a very thin layer of cells around the edges of this part, all the edges, both the inside, the outside, this bottom part. Everywhere that is basically a boundary condition, it creates extra cells. When you create a mesh, basically you're creating a finite approximation of a continuum. Because in reality, water is a collection, in this case our water model is a collection of atoms, but we can't model every single atom, so we're going to model a bunch of cells that are an approximation of a continuum of atoms. So this prism layer is helping us model the boundary conditions because that's what can be very important in CFD modeling. So that's the prism layer. And the thin mesher, what you need to know about the thin mesher is that it actually does not allow you to compute or to generate meshes using parallel processing. So because we're using this mesher, the mesh on smaller computers might take a little bit, or less powerful processor computers might take a little bit longer. Let's go into the default controls and set a few parameters. I'm going to set this base size to be about 5 millimeters. And we're going to come down here and check the number of prism layers. We're going to leave that at 2. And the prism layer's total thickness is 33% of the original base size. Now this meshing is one of the most difficult parts of CFD, and this is something that will really come with practice and study as you learn it better. But for now, we can accept most of these default controls. The base size is the most important one to make sure you get right, because that controls a lot of the other ones. So then we're going to select our automated mesh node, and we're going to select input parts and choose our geometry part, water. And now we're going to execute the mesh. And as long as it's not too big, it should run pretty close to instantly. If it's taking too long, feel free to click this X button and exit out and make the base size a little bit bigger, because unless you're using a powerful computer, the meshing can take a significantly long time. I think we're getting pretty close. While that's running, I'm going to come down here and work on creating a new mesh scene. oh, that's going to actually not happen until after finished, which it just did. Great. So this is our mesh. You can see they're all polygons because, or polyhedrals, I guess, because they're three-dimensional, because we chose the polyhedral mesher right here. So we're now going to actually, we can see kind of the outside of the mesh, but I want to see the inside of the mesh. So we're going to come down to our mesh scene, go into displayers, mesh, select the parts, and we're going to deselect this region, and we're going to select our planes that we had selected here, or that we created. Hit OK, and boom, we can see the mesh. So you see, this is the prism layer. It makes a very thin layer around the edges to help capture the boundary condition. Now, this may not be a perfect mesh, but because we're doing a very basic geometry, we're going to stick with it for now. And so this is how you create a mesh. That's what we're going to do for this video.